Hey, you snappers. We've come to this moment. I've been trying to figure out how to go about this. A lot of you guys have already read this book. Many of you have, and you know that on page 17, things get a little weird. I have an Amazon.com review. They're mostly really good reviews. I've got one star review, one negative review, and it's a woman who writes under the handle "Concerned Mom," and I don't doubt that she's genuinely concerned about her kid, but she goes through and pretty much hammers the book on language. She says it's got filthy language and we are to that point. We are on chapter 4, where our protagonist, Sherman, meets his profane team captain and coach. I considered just mouthing the words, but I just can't do it. So anyway, if you are offended by the F-bomb, or if you are a parent and you don't want your child to be subjected to that kind of language, I understand. It's my reason for putting it in the book is because it's the way it really is, and that's maybe a little scary, but it's real. So I want to warn you before you play this. If you're in the car and you're playing it through your radio, I want you to know that it won't be long before some pretty nasty language gets dropped. I would point out, last thing before I begin reading, it is not Sherman that's using this language. It's the world that he's trying to become a part of, and it's part of the reason it's hard. I think that's really worth paying attention to. In any case, you've been duly warned. If you continue to watch and listen from here on, it's your own deal, all right? Okay, fair enough. All right, here we go. Jeff Slade, team captain. Cussing, the F word. Coach, uniforms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Eagles, Hawks, and Bluebirds. Bowden, and a cautionary tale. Okay, so here we go. Well, fuck me gently with a chainsaw. Those were the first words that Jeff Slade, my team captain, ever said to me. The F word is the filthiest word there is. Everyone knows it. That's what makes the next thing that happened on my first day of cross-country practice even more surprising. Coach, an entirely unknown commodity to me at the time, did not erupt at his senior leader. He did not frown or scold. He didn't even pretend he hadn't heard. No, he smiled and nodded as Slade stared at me after uttering his ugly little rumination. I took this to mean that Coach tolerated the use of the F word. I was wrong there. He didn't just tolerate it, he relished it. He cherished it. He used it often himself with a natural-born potty-mouthed poetic grace. Martin Vidstein, I was soon to discover, used curse words the way Jackson Pollock used color, intuitively, emotionally, and with a style all his own. He sprinkled and splattered his rants and lectures impulsively with F-bombs and scatological phrasings. When he was on a roll, it was a glorious thing to hear, almost like music, like jazz, the Bad Plus or Charles Mingus. It was an aspect of him that I enjoyed, even when I hated him, even before The Secret. Needless to say, Coach wasn't your typical coach, and Jeff Slade wasn't your typical team captain. To put it bluntly, they both were probably insane. And I don't mean that hyperbolically. I think had they both been subjected to psychological testing, both would have been found to merit serious observation and medication. Buckets of it. On the occasion of our first morning practice, a hot August a.m., the sun already pressing down on us at 7 o'clock as we sat in a loose circle in our thinnest cotton t-shirts and nylon shorts, the bleached-out school parking lot bounced the slanting glare of the sun up into our faces. I remember sweating just sitting there. I remember feeling like a buttered chicken in a rotisserie. Coach roared up that day 10 minutes late in his rusted red Subaru. There were cartoonish puffs of black smoke farting out the tailpipe. He screeched to a halt, sideways across several parking spots. "Hey, Slade!" he brayed in his Boston accent as he shoved his door open. "That little bastard!" He said this while pointing at me, although I had not yet met the man. "His brother and the Keen kid are going to put all you old sons of bitches out of business." He smiled. "You better quit smoking them goddamn cigarettes." He ran a 10:22 mile as a sixth grader. I wanted to correct him as it had been a 10:19, but I thought it better to keep my mouth shut and wait to see what happened next. And that, to get back to the start of this anecdote, was when Slade said it. His long right leg was stretched out in front of him, his left leg tucked under him. He stared across the loose circle of runners right at me. "Well," he said, very deliberately, "fuck me gently," his eyes hard and glassy, "with a chainsaw." The look on his face left no room for interpretation. Slade wanted to kill me. After smiling approvingly, Coach replied, "That won't help. Maybe someone ought to fuck me with a chainsaw. Get my mind off of my problems, which are many. Wife kicked me out of the house again, damn it. Slept like shit." Then, as he was walking back to his car to get something he'd left there, he shot back over his shoulder. "Then again, unless you get faster, you're going to be the first senior team captain who had to run for the goddamn JV in school history. You got 3 freshmen who are better than you without trying." He swung open the car door and picked up a pen from the floor and slammed it shut again. "And a few of these other pud knockers have actually put in some miles this summer." He shrugged, changing his mind. "On second thought, maybe someone should fuck you with a chainsaw." The most shocking phrase I'd ever heard. 3 times in under 10 seconds. Twice by the man who was to be my coach, and the other directed right at me from my team captain. It was all a little mind-bending, and I suddenly wished I was 6 years old. Back home again, barefoot, sitting in front of the TV in my jammies, sticky glazed donut in hand. However, by the power of pure social inertia and the relentless nature of time, I was stuck in what was quickly becoming my predicament. Sometimes your destiny feels more like a spider's web than a mountain summit. The two of them, I realize now, were perfect for each other. Coach Vidstein was a small, raven-like man with a sharp beak of a nose, small dark eyes, a pair of black chunky glasses he wore about half the time, and hands like a pair of nervous birds themselves. Slade, bird-like as well, was a nearly 6'5" stork of a guy. His thin forearms were banded with muscle and thick bluish veins. Those sinewy forearms suggested that he might easily strangle me if he wanted to, and terrifyingly, he seemed to want to. He had 2 earrings in his left ear, a golden hoop and a small fake diamond stud. His bleached blonde mullet was so carefully blown dry and moosed that he could have sat in easily on a set with Poison, Def Leppard, or Rat, with nobody the wiser. It was just after our initial exchange that I thought, after conceding to myself that I'd never be 6 again, probably never even wear jammies again for that matter, of football and how I might possibly still be able to switch fall sports. The thought of being pounded into the turf by a rabid linebacker suddenly seemed strangely comforting, predictable at the least. The football players who had wordlessly clacked by us in their cleats that morning before Coach's arrival had sported practice shirts with catchphrases like "The will to win is nothing without the will to prepare," and "There is no I in team." I longed, as Slade's caustic words bounced around in my head, for those kinds of wholesome slogans, that bland certainty. The cross-country team's unofficial slogan, by comparison, seemed raw and surprisingly uninterested in athletic performance. But Coach wasn't about to order us anything like practice shirts with slogans on them anyway. He had no time for such nonsense. "You boys ain't a bunch of Barbie dolls for me to dress up," he'd say. He was true to his word. We never had an official slogan or matching practice gear. We never had a chant that we did before each race. With Coach, it was all about the running and nothing else. Everything else was silliness and distraction. I would first be confused by, then intrigued with, then embarrassed by, and ultimately proud of the baggy gray cotton sweats our varsity 7 warmed up in before each race. A far cry from my junior high days when I wore my crisp stitched-on number 21 in the fall and winter for basketball and football, and my sharp-edged 9 in spring out on the baseball diamond. Coaches' uniforms, warm-ups, and racing singlets were devoid of our school's name, Penns Gap High School, school initials, PHS, our mascot, the Snapping Turtles, Snappers for short. We didn't even wear the school colors, which were pine green and orange. Instead, we wore white Adidas singlets with 3 black stripes and black Adidas side-split running shorts with 3 white stripes. At the start line, we looked like the generic brand high school cross-country team. The core of it was that Coach hated school allegiances. Actually, I don't think he cared for allegiances of any kind except to the spirit of running and his runners themselves. For us, I came to realize over time he would have died many horrible deaths. "We're the goddamn Snapping Turtles," said Coach when I asked once why we didn't sport our mascot anywhere on our uniforms. "How can a runner be a turtle, for crying out loud?" The only decoration, if you could call it that, on the varsity warm-ups were black, handwritten numbers in Coach's own hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These numbers were located just under the brassy drawstring grommets on the heavy cotton hoodies, just under the neckline in front. The sweatshirts were all the same size, large, and following every race we swapped according to place. If you fell out of the top 7, you traded with the JV guy who had taken your spot and had to pull on the smelly green and orange nylons they wore. It was a dream bordering on obsession of mine that year to wear the number 1 at least once during the cool down, but that was Slade's number, at least until proven otherwise. When Coach came back from his car, he had a clipboard with 3 different workouts on it. Eagles, Hawks, and Bluebirds were the group designations. You were an Eagle if you'd ever run 60 or more miles in a single week and had broken 5 minutes for a mile. You were a Hawk if you'd done more than 40 in a week and had broken 5:30. If you'd never run a 40-mile week, even if you'd gone under 5, you were a Bluebird. Therefore, I, along with all the other freshmen, was deemed a Bluebird. I felt, then as now, that there was an inordinate status drop between the medium and low groups. The leap up from lowly Bluebird to predacious Hawk seemed a touch ridiculous. However, I expressed my intelligence for the second time that morning, as one often does, by keeping my mouth shut. "Bowden," said Coach after we'd mostly finished stretching, "you're in charge of the Bluebirds today. Take 'em out on Promise Road, 6 miles. Chris Bowden, an average runner and a kind person, a slightly built, soft-spoken guy with a huge Adam's apple and a mop of black hair, left his privileged place in the circle next to Slade and the other seniors and shambled over and sat down next to me, my twin brother, Adam Keene, and the other 2 silent, spooked freshmen, Brad Popeye Bechtel and Leonardo Chavez. Bowden smiled as he shook my hand. "You're pretty good, they say." His voice was quiet and smooth, calming even. He nodded at Keene as well, then my brother. "You too, Keene, Kindle number 2. All 3, you better watch your backs." He was smiling, but I could also tell he meant what he said. "All of you guys better watch out for Slade. I'll tell you a story on the run today." He made eye contact with all of us Bluebirds, each in turn. Think of it as a cautionary tale. But I didn't want to hear a cautionary tale. I just wanted to run. And I didn't want a crazy and violent team captain and a cussing coach whose wife had kicked him out of his house. I just wanted to start down the road to my destiny. This was my first day of practice, mind you, my first foray into being what I was supposed to be. Back in the soft glow of my youth, I decided that being a runner was my future identity. That morning on the parking lot hadn't seemed a very auspicious beginning. In fact, things were going to get a lot worse before they got better.